Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm taking you on the first part of a discovery tour through the capital of Malta, Valletta, the city of the Knights of St. John Hospitaller, built on a barren peninsula after successfully fighting off a siege by some 50,000 of Suleiman the Magnificent's finest. The city was established immediately after the siege and is still going strong, so strap on your walking shoes and let's take a look today on The Armchair Traveler. My name is Judy, and I love travel, history, and finding out what makes people tick. If you're enjoying my content, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your help means more people will see my content. If you want more information, I have a WordPress blog, a page on Facebook, and a Twitter handle. The addresses are here or in the information block at the bottom of the screen. Thank you and enjoy your visit. Valletta was the first planned city in Europe, built on the spine of the Scriberus Peninsula, shown here with the blue arrow. The peninsula has a prominent slope, and the knights were in something of a hurry to get on with the construction of what was intended to be a new, stronger fortress, so they didn't even think about grading the area flat. There are plenty of steps and changes in elevations of the roads. The streets are surprisingly straight, considering that the area was originally defensive in nature. You can learn more about the Knights and their evolution in my 15-minute History of the Knights of St. John Hospitaller. The link is in the description box below. To understand the city, we need to meet the man for whom it was named. His name was Jean Perisseau de la Vallette, and he was the 48th Grand Master of the Knights of St. John. In this outdoor memorial, he's shown standing on a substantial base. In real life, I suspect I probably overtopped him by at least 6 inches. Clearly, size is not what determines the greatness, much less the toughness, of a man. De la Vallette joined the order as a novice knight. He was captured by Muslim corsairs during his time in Rhodes. He survived for a while as a galley slave in one of their ships. He fought with distinction in Rhodes and during Suleiman's siege of that green and lovely island. He traveled with the knights as they wandered the Mediterranean looking for a new home, and he settled in here. To survive, he must have been unimaginably tough, both physically and mentally. This was not a man who was easily discouraged. De la Vallette became Grand Master in 1557. Work was already well underway to strengthen the defenses of the island, but the knights had concentrated themselves in an area that was already inhabited, principally a fishing village called Burgu, on the far side of the bay from the Scriberus Peninsula. Along with some 500 or so knights of the order, and around 6,000 men at arms, including professional soldiers, some civilians, and even some slaves, he fought off a siege by some 50 to 60,000 of Suleiman's finest warriors. At the end of the siege, however, the order's quarters and facilities on Burgu and Sengle were literally in ruins. The area was not a great one to rebuild. This French map from 1600 shows you how the knights built a new walled city, essentially from scratch, on the Scriberus Peninsula. This fine harbor, known to one and all as the Grand Harbor, has been known since antiquity. It is large, protected, and the prize of this part of the island, and what makes the island so important. Today, the modern cruise port is here as well, just as it was in antiquity. Easy walking distance to the many sites in this new city. The great siege instigated by Suleiman wasn't the last, and certainly not the longest the island has endured. On the left you see Fort St. Angelo, located across the harbor from modern Valletta, and from which Jean de la Vallette directed the defense of the island in 1565. Much later, the British directed their defense of the islands from the Axis from here during World War II. The people of Malta bravely persevered through 2 years of nearly constant bombing by Axis forces, which was designed to either beat or starve them into submission. Over 1,500 were injured, another 3,000 died, and 1 out of every 5 residents of the island was made homeless. King George VI of England awarded the George Cross, the highest civilian award in his ability to give, for the bravery and courage of the islanders shown during that siege. Malta is the only country to ever be so honored. The Siege Bell Memorial, shown on the right, commemorates all those who gave their lives to protect others during the war. And the Maltese flag, seen here, still incorporates the image of the George Cross. When you arrive at Valletta by cruise ship, your first challenge is to get up from sea level and into the city. You have 2 options. You can climb up from the waterfront along a roadway, And although it might not sound like much, the elevation here is around 200 feet. The smarter option, in my opinion, is what's called the baraka lift, the gray metal object just to the center of this photograph. For a minor amount of money, it will whisk you up to those gardens, part of the retaining wall of which you can see at the top right. It's worth the expense, in my opinion. Properly defending the city meant building an impregnable fortress. As you saw in my arrival photo, Valletta sits some distance above sea level on solid rock, which would be quite difficult to scale. However, the peninsula was still vulnerable from the landward side. At the end of the Great Siege, the knights were reasonably certain that Suleiman might have been defeated in that particular battle, but that he would come back. They thought about their situation, considered how the defense had played out during the hideous 4 months of summer in 1565, and decided more improvements were necessary. One of the first things they did was to dig a large ditch clear across Scribera's Peninsula, and marked in this map in yellow. It's still there. You cross over a small bridge to enter the city from the landward side through the main city gates, as shown in this image from Google Earth. Today you approach on foot through a large, pretty piazza with a very large and pretty fountain, something of an extravagance in an area so chronically short of potable drinking water. Most drinking water comes from 3 desalination plants here on the islands. I didn't think to taste the water in the fountain to see whether it was drinking water or salt, and I didn't notice any signs one way or the other to tell me. Just beyond that fountain is the bridge over the dry moat and the walls of the city. Valletta's main tourist strip and also its busiest thoroughfare is called Republic Street, and it stretches from the city gate all the way to St. Elmo. Within the old sandy-colored buildings that line this wide lane are a concentration of shops, restaurants, and some of the major attractions in the city. The existing walls needed repair, however. The gateway was too small and antiquated, and the island government actually needed more office space. There was no way to get more space magically inside those walls without demolishing something. The gates were one section of a 3-part project, which included building a new and ecologically sustainable Parliament House and converting the ruins of the Royal Opera House into an open-air theater. On the top you see a view of Republic Square before the rebuilding of the area. This part of the street was just a gigantic parking lot, and a disheartening thing for the thousands of tourists who enter by the main gates, shown below. Don't let the small number of people in that bottom photograph fool you. I took that photograph pretty early in the morning, as the first cruise ship passengers were just coming into the city. Every city I've ever visited in Europe has to contend with the challenges of urban renewal. The arguments for and against are often passionate. The Valletta entryway project that you see here was designed by Italian architect Renzo Piano and included 3 parts: the entry and gateway to the city, the new Parliament House, and some kind of urban renewal of the bombed-out former Royal Opera House. The area features a combination of native rock, concrete, and steel, although only the limestone is obvious to me. The new gateway is larger and, in my opinion, more open, inviting, and absolutely breathtaking. I suspect the Knights would never have approved, since it can no longer be closed off. Parliament House was, by all accounts, desperately needed to replace the former quarters in the Grand Master's Palace. I read that they were unable to put in sufficient electric cable to be able to use their computers. Parliament House was purpose-built from scratch at the same time as the gates and was designed to match them, but to do so in an ecologically smart way. The rooftop features high-efficiency solar panels to partly offset the building's considerable energy requirements. Malta relies mostly on imported liquefied natural gas and was looking ahead, thinking that the day might come when they could be cut off. The original Opera House was, however, a far more contentious effort, with some factions wanting to tear it down and start over, others wanting to leave it as it was after the World War II damage, and no agreement. The architect came up with an elegant compromise solution: preserve some of the remaining pillars and steps in the front and side walls to give you an idea of what happened during those raids, and to repurpose the ruined interior as an open-air music venue. Once you exit the lift, you enter the Upper Baraka Gardens, which overlook the Grand Harbor and are a very pleasant place to visit. They were designed to be pleasant, created in 1661 as a kind of a playground or recreation area for the Knights of the Italian Lang, and offer a fantastic view of the Grand Harbor, the three cities, and the shipyards across the bay. The word baracca in Maltese refers to a bastion or a fortified defensive structure. It's one thing to read that this is the southernmost capital of the European Union, but quite another to experience it. I took the photo on the left on April 1st. At home, I wouldn't even be able to purchase baby geraniums until close to the end of May. These were in full bloom. On the right, you can see the garden enclosure, the top level with the archers, as seen from across the harbor. During the Great Siege, some of Suleiman's artillerymen camped out here on the Scribera Heights, the better to bombard the knights across the harbor. This area was one of their favorite locations, chosen so well that once the knights had possession of the peninsula, they kept it and used it for the same purpose. The saluting battery was constructed in the 16th century. On the right, you can see a soldier patiently explaining how the guns work to the tourists, including me. They shoot off those cannons every day at noon, and although I didn't think to record it, I promise you it's loud. The gardens here are a public park and have not just benches, overlooks, restrooms, a very welcome water fountain, fabulous views and flowers. There's quite a bit of memorial statuary. On the left is Les Gavroches, a bronze sculpture by Antonio Sciartino, showing us a picture of Parisian street children inspired by Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. While the subject might have been that of street children, the theme was one of hope and innocence, symbolizing the aspirations of the younger generation for freedom and progress. Was this a hint to the British that it was time for them to move on? The Maltese people have dealt with foreign overlords for millennia. They know how to walk right up to the line without provably crossing it, at least most of the time. I'd like to think that that was the message here, especially considering where they put it. Tucked off to the side and quite nearby is an unflattering memorial to Sir Winston Churchill, paid for by public subscription. Malta's relationship with its succession of overlords, the Phoenicians, Romans, Greeks, Arabs, Normans, Sicilians, Swabians, the Aragonese, the Knights of St. John, the French, and finally the British, was characterized by their ability to outweight them. Malta became a crown colony in 1814. During World War II, Malta's brave resistance against the Axis powers and loyalty to Britain came at a terrible price. I think it probably increased the popularity of the independence movement, which has been simmering, well, basically forever. In 1964, Malta became independent, but remained a member of the Commonwealth. 10 years later, Malta declared itself an independent nation. To the Maltese, Churchill presented two faces. He was a kind of hero, at least during World War II, but also the personification of the foreign occupying ruling elite. He saw their value, but also their usefulness. Churchill visited here at least 6 times, but unlike the late Queen Elizabeth II, who as Princess Elizabeth actually lived here for 2 years while her husband, later His Royal Highness Prince Philip, was stationed on the island in the Navy. This complicated view of Churchill and the English demonstrates, in my opinion, the absolute practicality of the Maltese people. They know who they are and what they can actually do, and have learned over time that if they just sit tight, eventually their overlords will go away. At our last stop, I mentioned that the Maltese were of 2 minds about the English. It's possible they felt that way about Princess, later Queen Elizabeth, as well. However, she actually lived here with her husband, later Prince Philip, who was serving in the Royal Navy. I've read that those 2 years were the happiest and freest of her life. Here you can see a little monument with a tree installed in honor of their diamond wedding anniversary. The Lascari war rooms are a complex of tunnels and rooms carved into the native rock of Valletta. They're named after the nearby Lascaris Battery, which itself was named after Giovanni Paolo Lascari, a Grand Master of the Order of St. John. The complex expanded existing tunnels under the gardens and the saluting battery, which the Hospitallers had used as slave quarters. They had served as an advanced Allied headquarters for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. This area is definitely not handicapped accessible. You can enter today through a moderate number of steps via the Upper Baracca Gardens, but during the war, entry was from sea level. There was no elevator, and I'm not at all sure there could be any way to put one in, even today. General Eisenhower directed many of the operations heading into Sicily from these rooms. Ike was known to think that his officers should be fit and at appropriate weight for active duty. There's a story, probably apocryphal, that he used to lead his men up the steps from sea level to the operational headquarters. The map shows how team members would have plotted the location and movements of vessels, whether Allied or Axis, approaching or leaving the island. Old Bakery manages to achieve a remarkable feat. It slants uphill in both directions. Notice that the building facades are constructed almost exclusively of the native stone. Those balconies you see are generally made of wood. All of the wood has to be imported. When the knights arrived in 1530, the island was already long deforested. The knights themselves complained that to acquire the wood they needed to build or repair their ships or their buildings, they actually had to import it, mostly from Sicily. Malta has made efforts to try to reforest the island, but this is an expensive process and progress has been slow and grudging. The country did sign up for COP26, whose main effort was to try to stabilize greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. Malta pledged to end and reverse its deforestation by 2030, and projects are in progress involving planting indigenous trees, which can handle the heat, wind, and dry climate. Because Valletta sits on the spine of the peninsula, access to the streets on either side of the main drag mean you have to either climb up or down steps, often quite a few of them. Here you can see uphill and downhill views that I snapped from the front of my apartment hotel. The entrance is shown in the lower right. Left are the rather formidable steps leading down from Old Bakery Street to the entrance. On the top right are even more steps, this time still leading downhill to Gendas Street, but this time with a handrail. There's plenty of construction debris to deal with as well. One of those single-owner buildings I mentioned that had been converted during the building boom was my home base for the city. It's called Aquila Mansion. The name means eagle. Based on what my cab driver told me about how many private buildings were being converted into hotels or apartments, I assumed that this happened fairly recently. The building had many virtues and was perfectly adequate for my needs. The air conditioning seemed to work, the stove worked, there was even a rooftop terrace and an elevator. I liked it. If and when I return, I'd be more than happy to stay here again. I have to admit I also enjoyed the tiles. We've walked, climbed, and talked enough to build up a reasonably good appetite, and to be honest, on the day I did it, I did not much feel like cooking. The Maltese can fix that. I found Street, S-T-R-E-A-T, restaurant. It was a basement establishment, air-conditioned, and just a few blocks from St. John's Co-Cathedral, so it was handily on my way back to the apartment. The current menu offers quite a wide choice of world cuisines, but I wanted the rabbit. Rabbit in various forms is a national dish here, usually in the form of stew. Rabbits were probably introduced here by the Phoenicians to ensure a fresh supply of meat and have been around for at least 3,600 years. Eventually, some of the rabbits, of course, got loose and took to breeding in the wild, well, like rabbits. During the time of the Knights, there were laws that prohibited the local population from hunting or even eating the rabbits. This was not just greedy, it was stupid. The rabbits got totally out of control, broke into all of the gardens, did a lot of damage, and eventually led to a revolt called the Rising of the Priests. After that, the local authorities mostly wised up. The staff here pushed the expensive bottled water on the theory that I was British, not American, and would be afraid of the tap stuff. I didn't go for that, not because it was expensive, although it was, but because I knew the local tap stuff was safe to drink. The stew, served here with bread and a side of fried potatoes, was just excellent. I think there was probably an appetizer as well, but I didn't think to photograph it. I do remember after that and the wine waddling back to the hotel. Thank you for joining me for this walk and for the lunch. Come back next time and we'll explore more of the fascinating 55 acres that is the modern Valletta here on The Armchair Traveler.